In this video, we're going to talk about the mechanics of a critique, or really just kind of ways we can interact with the affirmative when we're reading a critique on the negative. First thing, we're going to cover three things in this video. First, we're going to look at what makes a good link. Second, we're going to talk about the alternative a little bit. And lastly, we're going to look at ways we can interact with the aff with kind of K-tricky type arguments. First, what makes a good link? There are three parts to any good link argument. The first is going to be the theory of the critique. Usually this is going to be the explanation that is described inside of the piece of evidence that you are reading. How does it describe the assumptions being flawed that the affirmative used inside of its analysis? The second thing you're going to do is you're going to then parse through that theory, and you are going to run parallel or connect the theory to the affirmative. How is the affirmative doing something that is being implicated by the piece of evidence? And then you were going to want to use a historical example in order to really solidify what exactly is going on. And the reason you want to use a historical example is that it allows the judge to have functionally another piece of evidence or something that they can really hang their hat on in order to be able to vote for your critique. One other thing about the historical example is that the historical example needs to also sort of weave in the impact discussion to a certain degree in order to make sure that there is not a contradictory historical example, or that the historical example you use really does prove the impact true as well as the link argument true. Now, the alternative. There are three parts to a good alternative discussion. The first is going to be what exactly the alternative is. Usually this means you're going to repeat the alternative text. You're going to kind of explain what that means, define any hard terms. It's really good to contrast it with what the affirmative does, and the reason you want to contrast it is that it's going to be able to help you insulate yourself from any sort of permutation questions that might occur from the affirmative. The second thing you want to do with the alternative is you want to have a short explanation as to how the alternative is able to resolve the impacts of the critique. Now, this may mean that you end up making some roll the ballot arguments, some roll the judge arguments, in order to sort of package how the alternative is able to solve for the impacts, because sometimes it's the impacts that you're discussing are not something that you can actually solve inside of a debate round, and so you might make it about an education aspect or an ethicality question. So it's important to make sure that the package of your impacts and your alternative are cohesive in that they explain why the alternative is able to provide uniqueness and solve for the impacts of the criticism. Now, the last thing you might want to talk about with an alternative is kind of answer the question, does the alternative solve the aff? Now, there is a lot of policy teams right now that think that if the alternative is able to solve the impacts of the aff, that it makes it a floating pick, but that's not true. A floating pick has to do the affirmative action, and so you got to be careful and explain that to judges and explain, my alternative solves the affirmative, here's how. It functions like an advantage counter plan because explanation, or it's a floating pick, weren't criticizing the plan text, all of those things are important to be able to sort of help the judge be able to insulate what is going on in the debate and be able to articulate a reason why they might be voting for you. Alright, now we're going to go over some different interactions that can occur, some sort of like K-tricks that you can use in order to beat affirmatives when you are negative reading critique. The first, impacts outweigh. One easy K-trick that can be done that, if not answered properly by the affirmative, is an easy way for judges to vote, is if you control the magnitude question of what is the biggest and most important impact in the round. Now, this could be something like ontology first kind of framing. It can be ethicality framing. It doesn't really matter, but usually you're going to want it to not be a body count of some sort as to what the biggest impact on the round is. And using that, you can write someone's ballot and say that this is the biggest impact in the entire round. It's the thing that the judge should vote on first and foremost. You have a link to your argument. They have not forwarded a way to be able to solve for that impact, therefore negative ballot. Another place that you can interact is on the uniqueness level. You can make some impacts are inevitable arguments, and a lot of times inside of the theory of the criticism that you are reading, you will be able to make some arguments as to why those things happen, i.e., if you were reading a Cap K and they have a war advantage, you would be able to make the argument that greed and the necessity for economic growth and new markets necessitates adventurous wars to ensure there are new markets to be able to sell products to, can be able to be used to say that wars and world wars might be inevitable no matter what. Or maybe the idea of competition and markets means that oil wars are going to occur because it is a finite resource and people are going to compete over it and fight. So these are things you can kind of think of, and you can use it to sort of minimize the impact that the affirmative might be able to have when you are going for those arguments. On the link level, I think there are two kind of main arguments you can make when you're interacting with the AF. The first is you might have some solvency impact cards, and these will be things like the institution itself fails. So if you're reading anarchy, you can be like, the state is the problem. It can never be able to solve for an issue. Maybe it's like militarism. Be like, state is the cause of militarism. As long as there is a state, there is going to be militarism. It can never stop that militarism. Institutions fail, whether they're slow, whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can make institution fails arguments. You can also make serial policy failure if you're going for maybe an ontology argument or an epistemology argument. You can say that the way we approach policy guarantees its failure first and foremost in order to make sure that there are more policies that are needed in the future. The second sort of thing you can do on the link level is you can try to turn the advantages. Sometimes your theories will be able to articulate that doing the affirmative would actually make their impacts occur more likely. And then when you have, and as you know, if you need a uniqueness for your link turn, your alternative becomes that uniqueness in that situation. So you can think about the link turn that you might be able to have there. On the internal link level, there's a couple arguments that you can make. The first is a predictions argument. This can be complexity. This can be just academic research is bad. Whatever it is, you can make arguments about why the predictions that they are making inside of the 1AC are not accurate ones and not ones that should be trusted because of that. Oftentimes, if this is a conceded argument, judges will give either low probability to the affirmative impacts or no probability to the affirmative impacts. So it's able to insulate you when you are negative pretty easily. Another one is a root cause argument. You can, if you win the argument that the root of war is capitalism, for say, then as long as capitalism around war is inevitable, it means that you can kind of frame the argument as it's try or die for the alternative. Only the alternative has a risk of being able to solve because of this over-determining root cause argument that is sort of taking place. This will give you an ability to sort of make the AF disappear in that function, and then makes it so that they have to prove that they are able to solve as much as the alternative, and it kind of flips the solvency question inside of the debate. One thing you do have to worry about when you're going for this type of argument is that you have to make sure that when you're talking about an extinction impact, that you are shielding yourself from time frame arguments. A lot of judges just think that policy arguments have a quicker time frame than your critique does, so you want to make sure that you're on top of that and shielding yourself appropriately. On the impact level, You can use root cause to make inevitability claims. I think we sort of talked about this. It's kind of a combination of the uniqueness argument and the root cause arguments that we talked about above, except without any sort of solvency claims that are going on here. You can also impact turn their impacts. You want to make sure that it is more than, hey, that's a link to our criticism, because if you just say it's a link, that doesn't really generate any offense for you. It just proves that you have a link, which you should have already established earlier in the debate. So it should really only happen if you are struggling to generate links or you think that they might be a little bit shaky. Instead, you want to look at the parallel impact turns that you are going for, i.e. these link arguments function like a parallel impact turn, and you want to make sure you have an impact that is there and that impact is being properly framed as outweighing anything that the case can have. It's because of those reasons why, like, new links functioning as parallel impact terms, that it doesn't always make sense to read new link arguments on their impacts unless it is providing something beyond the original 1NC impact. And then also you can, kind of what we talked about on the alternative level is that you can make arguments as to why the alternative is able to solve the AF. This is always a productive thing to be able to articulate, and if it goes conceded, it makes for a pretty easy 2-and-R. I believe the last thing we're going to talk about is framework. Now, this could be easily sort of like the debate doesn't spill out of this room. It's only a question of our internal politics. Now, this can be because, like, movements don't occur. This can be because politics never change. It could be because persuasion just inherently doesn't affect the political. All of those could be reasons why we should only focus on inside of the debate, which means that they don't get access to fiat. That can be an easy K trick in order to be able to make that a policy team's not able to solve for anything. Another frameworky-esque argument that you can make with a critique is a role of the ballot argument. So you want to question the telos of the debate, i.e. what is the end point? What is the goal of the ballot? So the ballot would have a goal of finding the best method to end racism, or having a ballot that best fights managerialism, etc. Now, they have to usually be conceded in order to really frame people out of the debate, but in better debates, they'll be debated out as to what the best role of the ballot is, and you can make competing interpretation arguments about which role of the ballot is better. The next kind of frameworky argument is a role of the judge argument. And this describes the responsibilities of the judge. This is particularly prevalent in, like, identity debates, in the fact that a lot of judges are white, male, a lot of them are heterosexual, and so you can frame the debate around questions of what is the responsibility for the subject position of the judge in making an ethical decision. And those role of the judge arguments can help package and frame the debate in order for you to be able to win. And then the last one, which I think is becoming a little bit more prevalent right now, is a revise and resubmit sort of framing, which is that the affirmative is presenting a scholarly work. It is about the education that is being produced in this debate, and that the negative's job is to criticize and explain why the academic work is not sufficient. And kind of what the revise and resubmit framing is trying to do is it's trying to make it so that negatives don't have to win an offensive argument per se in order to be able to win the debate, but be able to win on some of these sort of defensive arguments. This is becoming a lot of pretty prevalent in, like, K-on-K debates, where the teams are very, very similar in sort of ideological dispositions, and so they will argue that winning a defensive argument is enough in order to be able to win the debate, and that offense-defense paradigms are actually preventing a nuanced discussion of the literature that is inherently necessary. That's it for this video and the mechanics of the critique.